Put 2 fingers to the side of your throat, just under the jaw, and press until you find it. That soft, insistent knock under the skin. Don't count it. Just feel it for a second, the way you'd feel rain start. That knock isn't only keeping time. It's keeping count. Think of it as a meter, but not the kind on a wall that ticks ever upward. The opposite, a meter set running at your birth with a fixed number already loaded into it, counting down from the very first beat. And here is the strange, slightly rude fact about it that almost nobody is told. Across the whole sprawling family of mammals, mouse, cat, horse, whale, the lot, that meter holds roughly the same number to begin with. Not exactly. Nothing in biology is exact. But on the order of 1.5 billion beats, give or take, and then it runs out and stops. One account. No top-ups. A mouse spends its share in a frantic blur and is gone in a couple of years. An elephant spends the very same share so slowly, so grandly, that it takes the better part of a human lifetime to get through it. Same total. Wildly different speed. As if every creature were handed the same envelope of small change at birth and simply chose, or had chosen for it, how fast to spend. I'll be honest, the first time that landed for me, I put my own fingers to my throat, exactly the way you just did, and felt suddenly and absurdly like I was watching a fuel gauge. Which is a ridiculous thing to do to a Tuesday. Hold that feeling lightly for now. We'll come back to your particular meter, and there's a real twist in it because you, specifically, are a bit of a cheat. But first, take those fingers off your throat and put your whole hand flat on the floor. Or the desk, the wall, whatever's nearest and solid.
Press.
Because the thing under your hand has a pulse too. Not a metaphor. Pulse. A real one that engineers measure with real instruments. The place you live, the city, the town, the great humming grid of streets and pipes and cable around you surges and ebbs on a daily beat as reliable as anything in your chest. There's a tide of water that rises through its pipes every morning when a few 100,000 people wake and shower inside the same 2 hours.
There's a twin-peaked swell of bodies through its trains, once toward work, once back.
There's a curve of electricity that dips in the small hours and climbs as the place wakes up. Put your hand down at 7 in the morning and the thing is racing. So there are 2 pulses in this story. Yours under your fingers, and the larger one under your hand, the pulse of the thing you live inside. And here is the whole episode, the single question I want to walk you all the way into, quietly, from every angle, before we're done. We have spent 2,500 years insisting that the second pulse is the same kind of thing as the first. That a city is a body, a great living creature, a beast made of us. Kings believed it. Philosophers drew diagrams of it. And they were onto something real because the resemblance is genuinely uncanny. But there is one law, one rule that every mouse and elephant and every cell in your hand obeys without exception. And the city, the moment you measure it carefully, turns out to break that law clean in half. We'll get to which law and how it breaks it, and why the breaking turns out to be a much stranger and gentler thing than it sounds. For now, just hold the 2 pulses side by side. Yours. And the floor's. One quick thing. While both pulses are still going under your hands, this channel has a pulse of its own, a slow and reliable one. A new story turns up here every few nights. Something strange to be curious about and to wind down to. The way the city's water comes up every morning, whether or not anyone's watching for it.
The subscribe button is how you keep that beat coming. And it asks about as much of you as your heartbeat asks.
One small movement, the one in your thumb, and then you can stop thinking about it entirely. That's the whole pitch, and I'll keep it as quiet as the rest of this. Now, back to the two pulses, yours and the floor's, because the next thing to do is find out why yours runs to that strange shared total in the first place. To understand why a city breaks the law of life, you first have to fall a little in love with the law itself. Because it is genuinely one of the most beautiful regularities anyone has ever found in living things. And it starts with a Swiss man, some cattle, and a set of airtight boxes. His name was Max Kleiber. He trained in Zurich, moved to the University of California at Davis at the tail end of the 1920s, and he built breathing chambers. Sealed boxes he could put an animal inside and measure very precisely how much energy it was burning just to stay alive. Not running, not hunting, idling. The cost of simply being a body with the lights on. And in 1932, he published a result that should have been boring and turned out to be one of the deep laws of the living world. Here's what everyone expected him to find, and it's worth sitting with the wrong answer for a second because it's so reasonable. An animal loses heat through its skin, its surface. A big animal has more surface than a small one, so surely a big animal needs proportionally more fuel. Double the size, double the heat loss, double the food. That was the assumption. The surface law. Tidy. It was wrong, and the way it was wrong is the whole story. Kleiber found that as animals get bigger, their engines don't merely keep pace with their size. They get thriftier. Take a cat and a mouse. A cat is roughly 100 times the mass of a mouse. By the tidy assumption, it should burn something like 100 times the energy. It doesn't. It burns only about 32 times as much. The cat is, per gram of cat, running a far more economical operation than the mouse. Think of it like a warehouse store. You walk in for one roll of paper towel, and it costs you a fortune per roll. You walk in for the giant bulk pack, and each roll inside it is suddenly cheap. Life works the same way. The more body you buy, the less each gram of it costs to run. Bigness comes with a bulk discount. An elephant, per pound, is running on a fraction of the fuel a mouse burns per pound. The elephant has, in effect, bought in bulk, and life has given it the wholesale rate on the basic cost of being alive. Now, exactly how steep that discount is, that turns out to be a genuine and ongoing argument among scientists. And I'm gonna be straight with you about it, rather than tidy it away, because the argument is part of the wonder. Kleiber's number was a particular fraction, metabolism scaling as roughly the 3/4 power of mass, if you like the maths. Some careful researchers, looking again with better temperature corrections, have argued the real figure sits closer to 2/3. People have been politely fighting about 3/4 versus 2/3 for decades, and they're still at it. But, and this is the part nobody disputes, the rock under the argument, whatever the exact figure, it is less than 1. Bigger bodies are cheaper to run per cell than small ones. The discount is real, even if the exact size of the discount is still being haggled over. Hold on to the discount. The discount is the law. So bigger animals are thriftier. Lovely. But here's where it stops being an accounting curiosity and starts reaching for your own throat, because that same discount sets the speed of everything you are. A small animal running its expensive little engine has to live fast. Its heart hammers. The smallest mammal on Earth is a creature called the Etruscan shrew, which weighs less than 2 grams. You could mail several of them with a single stamp, and its heart, at rest, has been clocked beating around 1,000 times a minute. Around 17 beats every second. Tap your finger on the table as fast as you possibly can. The shrew's heart is beating faster than that, at rest, all day. To feed that furnace, it has to eat something like 1.5 to twice its own body weight every single day. It is a creature living with the throttle jammed wide open, permanently, because at that size, there's no other way to stay warm. Now go the other way, to the elephant with its bulk discount and its thrifty wholesale engine. Its heart doesn't need to hammer. It ticks over at something like 30 beats a minute, slower than yours, grand and unhurried. And here is where the two halves snap together into the thing you felt at the start. Small animals beat fast and burn out fast. Big animals beat slow and last long. Heart rate slows as bodies grow, and lifespan stretches as bodies grow. And the two effects are mirror images of each other, riding on that same quarter power discount. Multiply them together, fast and short for the shrew, slow and long for the elephant, and the lifespans and the heartbeat rates very nearly cancel out. What's left, roughly, across the mammals is that shared total. On the order of 1.5 billion heartbeats, however you choose to spend them. That's the meter from the cold open, and now you can see why it reads the same on a mouse and a whale. The shrew spends its 1.5 billion beats in a frantic 2-year sprint. The elephant spends the same 1.5 billion across 70 unhurried years. Same envelope of change. The little one throws it away in an afternoon. The big one makes it last a lifetime. I find that almost unbearably elegant, that a whale and a shrew, separated by a factor of millions in size, are in some deep sense living the exact same allotted life, just played at wildly different tempos. I should hedge this, honestly, because the channel's whole promise is that I won't oversell it to you. The 1.5 billion figure is a rough convergence, not a sacred constant. It's really more of a broad band, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5 billion, and individual species scatter around it. It's a heuristic, a deep tendency, not a law carved in stone. But the tendency is real, and it is strange, and it means something true about you. Your heart is not just a pump. It's a way of spending a finite, roughly fixed allowance at a speed your size chose for you. And now, the twist I promised. Because you, specifically, are cheating. Run the numbers on a human being the way you'd run them on any other mammal. Take our body size, find where we sit on the curve, and you get a prediction for how many beats we ought to get. A human heart beats somewhere around 60 to 100 times a minute, and over the lifespan biology hands an animal our size, that should come out to about the standard allowance. The 1.5 billion. Everybody else's number. Except we blow straight through it. A person living a long life today racks up something on the order of 2.5 to 3 billion heartbeats. We've roughly doubled the allowance. We are, more or less, the mammal that beat the budget. Living markedly, measurably longer than a creature our size has any right to. Spending a second envelope of change that no shrew or elephant ever gets to touch. How? Not magic, and not one single trick. Medicine, mostly. Clean water. Reliable food that doesn't run out in winter. The slow, collective, unglamorous business of removing the things that used to kill animals our size long before their hearts wound down. We didn't speed up the meter. We protected it. We kept the engine running long past the point where, in the wild, something would have stopped it. And I want to flag the honesty here, because cardiologists like Herbert Levine, who put real numbers to this back in the 1990s, would want me to. This is a heuristic, a rough doubling, not a precise readout.
The point isn't the exact figure.
The point is the direction. You are an animal that found a way to keep its budget open after closing time. Sit with that for a moment, because it's the first quiet turn of the whole story, and we'll come all the way back to it at the end. Every other mammal is locked to its meter. You are the one that learned, collectively, slowly, to cheat it. Keep that in your pocket. We're going to need it. But I've been telling you that bodies get this bulk discount without telling you why. And the why is gorgeous, and it's the hinge the entire episode swings on. So stay with me through one more idea. Why should a bigger body be thriftier per cell than a small one? For a long time, nobody had a real answer. It was just a number that kept showing up. Then, in 1997, 3 scientists, the physicist Geoffrey West with the biologists James Brown and Brian Enquist, published an explanation built from first principles. And it comes down to plumbing. Every cell in your body needs fuel and oxygen delivered, and waste taken away. To supply trillions of cells, a body can't just slosh nutrients around. It needs a delivery network, your blood vessels, branching from the great trunk of the aorta down through ever finer pipes to the tiniest capillaries threading past individual cells. And here's the crucial thing about that network. At the very bottom, the smallest unit, the capillary, is essentially the same size in a mouse and in a whale. The taps are identical. What changes is how many times the system has to branch to reach them all. West, Brown, and Enquist showed that if you want to build a branching network that fills a 3-dimensional body, supplies every last cell, ends in those fixed-size taps, and does it all using as little energy as physically possible, then the mathematics forces your hand. The most efficient possible network, scaled up, cannot keep its costs rising in step with the body's size. It necessarily becomes proportionally cheaper as it grows. The bulk discount isn't a quirk of cats and elephants. It falls straight out of the geometry of any optimal, space-filling, branching supply system. The discount is plumbing. It's what you get when you have to feed a bigger and bigger volume through a network that keeps branching down to the same little taps. And once you see the body as a supply network, the same team showed something that lands like a soft bell, because it's where life's whole shape comes from. Picture a growing animal. When it's small, its supply network delivers far more than it costs to maintain the body it currently has, so there's surplus, and the surplus goes into building more body. The thing grows. But growth is self-limiting, because the more body you build, the more of that delivery just goes to maintenance, to keeping the existing cells alive, until eventually the entire supply is consumed just holding the line. Income exactly meets upkeep. There's nothing left over to build with. And so the animal stops growing. It's the most familiar feeling in the world, dressed up as biology. It's the paycheck that, for years, had a little extra at the end of the month for something new. And then, one year, quietly just covers the rent and the bills, and nothing more. Every adult body you have ever seen is a network that reached the month where the income only covers the upkeep. That's why you stopped growing. That's why a horse is horse-sized and not, given enough hay, the size of a barn. The supply caught up with the demand, and the building stopped. West and his colleagues went one careful step further, and this is where it turns from biology into something closer to fate. The same logic that makes you stop growing, extend it out, is also tangled up with why you eventually wind down and stop altogether. The slow accumulation of wear in a system that's now spending everything it has just to maintain itself, with nothing in reserve. I'll hold the lightest possible touch on that, because the details are West's extension and still debated. But the shape of it is plain, and it's the law in one sentence. Living things grow, slow, settle into a fixed size, and then, on a schedule written partly by their own size, they stop. That is the law of life. Grow. Slow. Settle. Stop. Every mammal obeys it. The mouse and the whale obey it at different tempos, but they both obey it. Your own body is obeying it right now. You grew, you stopped growing, your meter is running. It is the most universal rule the living world has. Which is exactly why what comes next is so strange. Because we built something enormous, something that looks for all the world like a vast living body, with a pulse you can put your hand on. And it does not obey this law. It does the opposite of this law. Let me show you. Take your hand off your throat and put it back on the floor, because it's time to take the city's pulse seriously. Not as poetry, but as data, the way we just took the elephants. A city, it turns out, metabolizes. This isn't a vague resemblance. An engineer named Abel Woolman made it quantitative back in 1965 in an essay he actually titled The Metabolism of Cities. He worked out the throughput of a hypothetical American city of 1 million people, as if it were one great organism you had to feed. The water alone is staggering. He calculated that such a city needs more than 0.6 of a ton of water, about 150 gallons, per person per day. Multiply that across 1 million people, and you have a creature drinking something like 625,000 tons of water a day, pouring it in one end and sending sewage and refuse and pollution out the other. Food in, fuel in, waste out. It eats. It drinks. It excretes. On paper, it looks exactly like a metabolism. And that metabolism has a daily rhythm, the pulse from the cold open, and we can now watch it beat. The water demand has a sharp morning surge, roughly 6 to 9 a.m., as showers and toilets and taps across 1 million waking households all fire inside the same couple of hours. And then an evening peak as everyone comes home. The trains run on a twin-peaked daily cycle, a swell of bodies inbound in the morning and a near-mirror swell outbound in the evening. The electricity demand sinks to a trough in the dead of night and climbs through the day to an evening peak. If you charted any one of these, you'd draw something that looks uncannily like a heartbeat on a monitor, a steady daily systole and diastole, the city breathing in and breathing out. And just so you don't think this is all gentle averages, let me give you the single most vivid beat of a city's pulse anyone has measured. The Super Bowl. When American football's biggest game breaks for halftime, tens of millions of people across a city stand up at almost exactly the same instant and go to the bathroom. And the city's plumbing feels it. Utilities estimate that during halftime of the 2026 game, something like 1.25 million gallons of water surged through New York City system in under 20 minutes. One estimate put it at the equivalent of nearly 760,000 toilets flushing at once. In Miami, Water pressure across the system is estimated to drop by something like 18 to 22 pounds per square inch at the commercial breaks. The whole city's arteries sagging as everyone empties their tank in unison. These are utility estimates, not laboratory readings, but the thing they're estimating is real, and it is wonderful. A city flinching, all together like a single startled body, because a game went to an ad. So far, so much like an organism. It eats, it drinks, it pulses, it flinches. You can see exactly why, for 25 centuries, everyone was so sure. But now we do the thing measurement always does in these stories. We stop admiring the resemblance and we check the numbers. And the numbers say something that should not be possible. Here is the question that breaks the whole thing open. We know what happens to a body as it gets bigger. The bulk discount, the slowing pulse, the longer life, the eventual stop. So what happens to a city as it gets bigger? Does a big city, like a big animal, slow down and settle? In 2007, a team led by Luis Betancourt and Geoffrey West, the same West from the plumbing, did the unglamorous, enormous work of finding out. They gathered data on hundreds of cities and asked a simple question of each. When a city doubles in size, what doubles with it and what doesn't? And they found that the city splits cleanly into two halves that obey two opposite laws. The first half is the infrastructure, the physical body of the city. Its roads, its electrical cables, its pipes, its gas stations. And this half behaves exactly like an organism. When a city doubles in population, it does not need double the road surface, or double the cable, or double the gas stations. It needs noticeably less than double. The studies put the figure at around 85% of what simple doubling would demand. The bigger the city, the fewer miles of road per person. The less cable per person, the fewer gas stations per person. A big city is thriftier with its infrastructure than a small one per inhabitant. It gets the bulk discount. And here's the part that made everyone sit up. That discount, that scaling, is mathematically the same kind of discount that biology gives a growing body. The city's pipes and roads save resources as they grow in precisely the way an elephant's metabolism does. The physical body of the city really is, in this exact and measurable sense, behaving like an organism. So if that were the whole story, the metaphor would be dead right, and we could all go home. A city is a body. Case closed. But it's only half the city. The other half is the people and what flows between them. The wages, the ideas, the inventions, the crime, the wealth. And that half doesn't merely fail to slow down as the city grows. It does the precise opposite. It speeds up. When a city doubles in population, its economic and social output doesn't double, it more than doubles. Double the people, and you get something like 15% more per person of nearly everything humans produce together. More wages per head, more patents per head, more inventors, more research, more economic activity per person, just from making the city bigger.
It's as if cramming more people into a place doesn't divide a fixed pie into smaller slices. It bakes a bigger pie per person, purely as a function of size.
I have to be careful here, and the care is the wonder again. These exponents are pattern-level findings, not precise constants. You'll hear roughly 15%, about so-and-so, never an exact figure to 3 decimal places. And we'll get to a genuinely unsettling wrinkle in how robust they are. But the direction is the thing, and the direction is unmistakable, and it is the heart of this whole episode. Bodies, as they grow, get slower and thriftier per cell. The social life of a city, as it grows, gets faster and more productive per person. One law bends down. The other bends up. They are mirror images. The city is built on the law of life run backwards. Why would packing people closer together make each one more productive? Betancourt's answer, which he sharpened in 2013, is a lovely and slightly alarming image. A city is a social reactor. Think about what a city physically is, underneath the buildings. It's a machine for making people collide. The denser you pack human beings into a walkable space, the more chance encounters happen per person per day. More conversations, more deals struck, more ideas knocking into other ideas. More of the friction that strikes sparks. A bigger city isn't just more people, it's vastly more connections between people. And connections are where wages and patents and inventions come from. Cram the fuel rods closer and the reactor runs hotter. That's the engine under the 15%. It's not that big city people are cleverer. It's that the city itself is wiring them together more densely, and the output per person rises just from the wiring. And now, the catch, which is the most honest and most uncomfortable thing in the whole science, so I won't soften it. That 15% is not selective. The reactor doesn't only amplify the good. The exact same scaling law, the same upward bend, riding the same exponent. That gives a bigger city more wages per person and more inventions per person. Also gives it more serious crime per person and more new infectious disease per person. The same dial. There is, in the data, essentially one knob that turns up human interaction, and turning it up gives you more of everything that comes out of human interaction. The wealth and the wonders and the theft and the contagion, all rising together, all on the same curve. The thing that makes a big city a fountain of art and money and ideas is the identical thing that makes it more dangerous and more disease-ridden per person than a small town. You cannot, it seems, build a reactor that fuses only the good collisions. It's one dial and it turns up the whole of us at once. That's a hard fact, and I'm not going to flip it into comfort, because it's true, and it should sit a little uneasily. But hold it next to the law of life, and you start to see the shape of what a city actually is. A body grows in order to stop, to settle into a stable, maintainable, finite size, and live out its allowance. A city grows in order to grow faster, every increment of size cranking its own output, good and bad, higher still. One is built to come to rest. The other is built never to. And there's a place you can feel this law operating on your own two legs every day, without ever knowing your hand was on the dial. Let me show you the strangest measurement in this whole episode. In 1976, two researchers, Mark and Helen Bornstein, did something wonderfully sneaky. They went to cities and towns of wildly different sizes across 6 different countries, and they stood on the pavement with a hidden stopwatch, and they timed how long it took ordinary people, solo pedestrians, not hurrying for any particular reason, to walk a fixed 50-foot stretch of downtown. And they found something almost eerie. The bigger the city, the faster its people walked. Not a little, a lot. In the small Greek town of Itia, with a couple of thousand people, the average walker took about 22 seconds to cross those 50 feet. An amble, a stroll, a human being moving through their day. In Prague, a city of over 1 million, the average walker covered the same 50 feet in about 8.5 seconds. Nearly 3 times faster. Same human legs. Same 50 feet of pavement. The only thing that changed was the size of the place those legs were walking through, and the place reached into those legs and turned the speed up. The relationship was startlingly clean. Walking speed tracked the logarithm of the city's population, tight enough that you could almost predict how fast a stranger would walk just by knowing how many people lived around them. And it's been confirmed and reconfirmed. A later study across 31 countries found the same thing. Fastest feet in the biggest, richest, most developed places. And it found something poignant tucked alongside it. The places where people walked fastest also tended to have more heart disease, and yet, oddly, higher reported well-being. Speed has a price and a thrill, and the city charges both. Here's why it belongs in this episode, and why it might be the line that follows you out the door. Remember the city's two halves, the part that slows down like a body, and the part that speeds up against it. Your walking speed is on the speeding up side. It scales with city size by the very same kind of upward bending law as the wages and the patents and the crime, which means the pace of your own life, the literal speed of your own feet on the pavement, is being set in part not by you, but by the size of the place you happen to live. The city has a volume knob on your legs, and you have never once seen your own hand reach for it. You just walk faster because there are more people, because the reactor runs hotter, because the law that governs the city is reaching down into the law that governs your body and quietly speeding it up. And there's a newer, slightly haunting confirmation of this, because the speeding up is still going on. A team at MIT, led by Ariana Salazar Miranda and Carlo Roddy, took old film footage of public plazas in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, shot around 1980 by the urbanist William White. And they ran it through modern artificial intelligence to track how people actually moved. Then, they compared it to the same plazas filmed again around 2010. In 30 years, the average walking speed in those public spaces had risen by about 15%. And the share of people who lingered, who stopped, stood around, sat, did nothing in particular in a public square, had fallen by roughly half. We are measurably, decade on decade, walking faster and dawdling less in the same spaces as the reactor we live in turns its dial up another notch. So now you've felt the law, and you felt it break. Your body slows and settles toward its stop, like every mammal. The city you walk through speeds up and won't, and it's reaching into your stride to speed you up with it. Two pulses running opposite directions. Yours winding down. The floor's winding up. Now I want to tell you about 25 centuries of brilliant people who put their hand on that floor, felt that pulse, and got the direction exactly, magnificently wrong. For as long as humans have lived in groups large enough to argue about, we have reached for the same metaphor to explain ourselves to ourselves. The group is a body. Society is a creature. And every time someone reached for it, they were doing the thing you do with an X-ray you didn't quite know how to read, seeing the shadow of something real and naming the wrong organ. It starts, at least in the story Rome liked to tell about itself, in 494 BC. The common people of Rome, the plebs, were furious, crushed by debt, sick of fighting wars for aristocrats who gave them nothing. And they did something radical. They walked out. They withdrew from the city entirely, to a hill outside the walls, and simply stopped. A general strike, 25 centuries early. The city's elite, suddenly aware that a city without its workers is just some expensive buildings, sent a negotiator named Menenius Agrippa. And Agrippa, the story goes, didn't threaten them or bribe them. He told them a fable. Once, he said, the parts of the body grew resentful of the belly. The hands, the mouth, the teeth, they did all the work, the fetching and chewing and swallowing, while the belly just sat there in the middle, lazy and idle, soaking up all the food. So the limbs went on strike. The hands refused to carry food. The mouth refused to take it in. They would starve the useless belly into understanding. And of course, in starving the belly, they starved themselves. The whole body weakened, withered, and nearly died, because the idle belly had, in fact, been quietly digesting and feeding everything else all along. The plebs, the moral ran, were the limbs. The Senate was the belly. Strike against the body, and the body dies, and you with it. The story goes that the plebs were moved and came back, having won a real concession, their own officials, the tribunes of the plebs, to protect them. Now, whether that speech ever actually happened the way the historian Livy tells it centuries later is anyone's guess. It's the tale Rome told itself about its own founding tensions, polished by retelling. But look at what the fable assumes, because the assumption is the whole error in miniature. It assumes the city is a body, a single creature whose parts exist to serve the whole, where the belly's job is to keep the limbs alive, and the limb's job is to feed the belly, all of it in service of one shared life. It's beautiful, and it's persuasive, and it would echo down the next 2,500 years. And it points at exactly the wrong organ, because a city is not a thing whose parts serve the whole. We'll see, by the end, that it's almost precisely the reverse. Skip ahead 1,000 years, and the metaphor has grown a head and hands and a full anatomy. Around 1159, an English scholar named John of Salisbury wrote out the most thorough body map of the state anyone had attempted. The prince is the head. The Senate is the heart. Judges and governors are the eyes and ears and tongue. Soldiers and officials are the hands, one armed hand, one unarmed. The financial officers are the stomach and intestines. And the peasants? The farmers who work the soil? They're the feet, who, in his lovely and slightly damning phrase, cleave to the earth and hold the whole standing body up. It's an astonishingly complete piece of anatomy. And here's my favorite detail in this entire act, because it tells you how badly people wanted this metaphor to be true. To give his body of the state real authority, John claimed he was drawing it from an ancient letter, the Instruction of Trajan, supposedly written by the great Plutarch himself to the Roman emperor. A weighty classical source. Except the document almost certainly never existed. Scholars are now about as sure as they get about these things, that John of Salisbury simply made it up, invented a classical authority out of thin air to lend his living body of the state the gravity of antiquity. He wanted the metaphor to be old and true so badly that he forged its birth certificate. That's not a knock on him. That's how compelling this idea has always been. People will fabricate a source to make society a body. And then, in 1651, the metaphor gets its masterpiece. And hidden inside the masterpiece, its first real crack. Thomas Hobbes opens his great book Leviathan by going all in on the body. The Commonwealth, he writes, is an artificial man, bigger and stronger than the natural kind, made to protect it. Sovereignty is its artificial soul. The magistrates are artificial joints. The laws are its artificial reason. He builds the entire state
as one great manufactured creature, and he gives it a name from the book of Job, Leviathan, the unconquerable beast, which he calls that mortal God to whom we owe our peace.
And the image on the front of that book is one of the most haunting pictures in the history of ideas.
Drawn by Abraham Bosse with Hobbes's own input, it shows a colossal crowned giant rising over a peaceful landscape, holding a sword in one hand and a bishop's staff in the other. But look closely at the giant's body, at his great torso and his arms, and you see that they are not made of skin. They are made of people. Roughly 300 tiny human figures packed together, forming the body of the giant. And every one of them has their back to you. Every single citizen is turned inward and upward, facing the giant's distant head, the sovereign's face. Above them runs a banner, a line from Job. There is no power on earth to be compared to him. It's the most powerful possible statement of the metaphor. The state literally is its people, fused into one enormous body, all of them facing one way, animated by one will. We are the cells, the sovereign is the head, and together we are the mortal God. For a moment, hold that image, because it is genuinely the high watermark of the idea that a society is a single living creature. 300 people who have turned their backs on each other and on you to stare up at one face and become a body. And keep it in your eye, because in 200 years, a man is going to look at this exact image and accidentally prove it's backwards. That man is Herbert Spencer, writing in 1860, and he is the one who pushes the body metaphor harder than anyone before or since, right up until it snaps in his hands, and to his enormous credit, he notices its snap. Spencer was enchanted by the new industrial world, and he mapped it onto a body with real ingenuity. Society, he argued, genuinely is an organism. Its railways are the blood vessels, and he loved that a double railway track carried traffic in two opposite directions, just like arteries and veins carrying blood out and back. Industry is the digestive system, breaking down raw materials. The government is the brain, coordinating the whole. He pushed the analogy further into the details than anyone, limb by limb, system by system. And then, and this is the moment the entire 2,500-year-old metaphor quietly dies in a single honest paragraph by one of its greatest champions. Spencer turns over the one card that ruins his own hand. In a real body, he admits, only one part can feel: the brain. The cells of your liver don't have hopes. Your kneecap doesn't suffer. So in a body, it's right and natural that all the parts exist to serve the whole. The parts have no inner life of their own to protect. But in a society, Spencer writes, every single part is conscious. Every citizen feels, suffers, wants, matters in their own right. And therefore, he says it himself, the man arguing that society is an organism. Therefore, the relationship has to run the other way. In a society, the corporate life must here subserve the lives of the parts, instead of the parts subserving the life of the whole. Stop and feel how big that is. He has just said the exact opposite of Agrippa's belly fable. Agrippa: the limbs exist to serve the body. Spencer, 23 centuries later, staring at the same metaphor. No, the body must exist to serve the limbs, because unlike a real body, every limb here is a someone. The whole point of an organism is that the parts are for the whole. The whole point of a society, Spencer realizes mid-sentence, is that the whole is for the parts.
It is an organism turned completely inside out.
He had the inversion in his hands in 1860 and didn't quite see that it broke the entire metaphor he was building. He just noted it and moved on, like a man who spotted a crack in the dam and decides to keep admiring the architecture. If Spencer is the metaphor cracking, our last figure is the metaphor taken to its grimmest possible conclusion, with full confidence and getting the future flatly wrong. In the years around the First World War, the German thinker Oswald Spengler wrote a vast, gloomy, magnificent book called The Decline of the West. And he took the body metaphor utterly seriously, more seriously than anyone. Every great culture, Spengler declared, is an organism. It is born, it grows through a vigorous springtime, it matures, and then, exactly like any creature, it grows old and dies. And he gave it a lifespan, roughly 1,000 years, like a sort of civilizational biblical span. And he believed the great city, the giant metropolis, was the death stage of a culture. The place he called, with a shudder you can hear in the prose, the stone colossus, Cosmopolis, where a civilization's living roots wither into rootless masses, and the organism enters its winter. And because he was certain a culture is an organism with a fixed lifespan, he did the thing the metaphor dares you to do. He read the chart and called the time of death. He pinned Western civilization's arc to roughly the years 1000 to 2000, and declared that the West, in his own day, had already passed into its old age, its winter, its dying season. The metropolis was the deathbed, and we were already lying in it. Here we are, comfortably past 2000, and you can judge his prophecy yourself. This is the folly at its purest and most useful, so I want to be clear about what it teaches, not just that it failed. Spengler took the most seductive metaphor in human history. Society is a living body, and he followed it with total rigor to its logical end. If a city is an organism, then a city, like all organisms, must obey the law of life. Grow, mature, age, die, on a schedule set by its nature. He built his whole dark prophecy on the assumption that the thing scales like a body. And the prophecy failed, on schedule, because the assumption was wrong. The city does not obey the law of life. It runs on the law's mirror image. That's not just one gloomy German getting a date wrong. That's the entire metaphor, 25 centuries of it, breaking on a single fact about which way the curve bends. So the X-ray has been misread, brilliantly, from Agrippa's belly to Spengler's deathbed. They all heard a heartbeat in the city and assumed it was a heartbeat like ours, a meter counting down toward a stop. But you've already seen the data. The city's pulse isn't counting down. It's speeding up. So if the city isn't an organism, what on earth is it? And is there anything we've built that does die, like a body, that could show us, by contrast, what the city is refusing to do? There is. And it's closer to you than the city. It might be signing your paycheck. Here is the fact that more than any other finally untangles the whole knot, that shows you exactly where the city sits by showing you what's standing on either side of it. Companies. Corporations. The firm you might work for? They turn out to be the honest middle child between you and the city, because a company scales and dies very nearly like an organism. In 2015, a team, Madeline Dape, Marcus Hamilton, Geoffrey West, and Luis Betancourt, much of the same crowd from the scaling work, did for companies what Kleiber did for cattle.
They took the records of over 25,000 publicly traded American companies going back to 1950, and they asked, how long do companies live and how do they die? What they found is that a company has a half-life of about 10.5 years. Let that sit. Take any batch of public companies, and in roughly 10 years, half of them will be gone. Half. Gone before a child started in kindergarten would finish primary school. Of the 500 giants on the Fortune 500 list in 1955, the biggest, strongest, most dominant corporations in America, only about 12% were still on that list 60 years later. Nearly 9 in 10 had vanished. These are not fragile startups. These were the titans. And the titans die like mayflies. And here's the part that makes them so revealing. The way companies die looks statistically like radioactive decay. A company's chance of dying in any given year barely depends on how old it is. A 50-year-old firm is about as likely to die this year as a 5-year-old one. As one of the researchers, Marcus Hamilton, put it, it doesn't matter if you're selling bananas or airplanes or anything else. The mortality rate comes out the same. A company is like an atom of a radioactive element sitting at a roulette wheel that gets spun fresh every single year, with the same odds of coming up gone every time, regardless of how long it's already survived. There's no safe old age. There's just the wheel, spinning again. And note the gentlest, strangest detail. Most companies don't actually go bankrupt. When the researchers looked at how these thousands of companies died, only a small fraction, a few percent, went bust or were liquidated. By far the most common way for a company to die, nearly half of all the deaths, was to be absorbed, bought, merged, swallowed into something else. The typical corporate death isn't a dramatic collapse. It's being quietly eaten. Geoffrey West reads this, alongside the scaling work, as companies behaving like organisms. They start small and creative and fast, like a young animal. They grow. And as they grow, the bulk discount of bureaucracy sets in. More of the energy goes to maintaining the structure, to process and administration, less to creation, exactly like a body whose income gets eaten by upkeep. The startup buzz fades. The thing matures, slows, settles, and then, on its radioactive schedule, it dies. A company grows, slows, settles, and stops. A company obeys the law of life. I should be precise here, because the honesty matters. That 2015 study measured the mortality. The framing of firms as organisms that mature and die is West's interpretation, laid over the top, and worth keeping a half step separate. But the shape is striking. We built a thing, the company, that follows Kleiber's law almost as faithfully as the elephant does, which throws the city into the sharpest possible relief. Because the city, made of those same dying companies, does not die. Geoffrey West has a way of putting this that I haven't been able to shake since I first heard it. You can drop an atom bomb on a city, he says, and we have, twice. And 30 or 40 years later, that city is thriving, alive, full, humming. But if you dropped the equivalent of an atom bomb on even the mightiest company, on a Google, on whatever the largest firm in the world is the day you hear this, it would be dead. For certain. Gone and not coming back. Sit with that contrast, because it's the whole thesis in one image. A company is so mortal that a hard enough shock simply ends it. A city is so robust that we have done the most violent thing human beings know how to do. We have detonated nuclear weapons over cities full of people,
and the cities came back.
Within a human lifetime, they were not just standing, but flourishing. The buildings are not the city. The roads are not the city. You can vaporize the body, and the city regrows it, because the city is not really the physical thing at all. The city is the network, the dense web of human connections, the social reactor, the pattern of people colliding and trading and building. And as long as the people and their connections persist, the city pulls itself back together out of the ash, the way a flame reforms the instant you give it fuel and air. That's not a poetic flourish, by the way. It's close to the literal physics. A city is what's called a dissipative structure, a term from the Nobel-winning chemist Ilya Prigogine. A dissipative structure is something that holds its shape only by constantly pumping energy and matter and information through itself. A whirlpool in a river is one. A candle flame is one. They have a definite, stable, recognizable form, but no single drop of water and no single molecule of wax stays in them. The stuff is always flowing through, and the shape is what persists. A flame isn't a thing. It's a process wearing the costume of a thing. And so is a city. The particular bricks and particular people flow through and are replaced generation after generation, but the pattern, the reactor, the network, the pulse holds. Which is why you can't kill it by destroying its body. You'd have to somehow stop the flowing itself. So is the city immortal? Has it actually escaped death entirely? This thing that beats the budget the way you beat it, only far, far harder? No. And the way I have to say no is the most important hedge in this whole episode, so I'm going to be careful. Cities are almost never killed. Not never.
Because cities do die.
Just not the way bodies do. A body dies of old age, of the law, the meter running out, the system spending everything on maintenance until it can't. A city never dies of old age. There's no such thing as a city too old to go on, the way there's no patent too old that the city can't keep generating them. But a city can die when the thing underneath it, the reason people came together there in the first place, its economic substrate, collapses out from under the network. Rome is the great example. At its height in the 2nd century, the city of Rome held something like 1 million people, one of the largest cities the ancient world ever built. And then, over the following centuries, as the empire that fed and watered and ordered it came apart, Rome didn't just decline, it cratered. By the middle of the 6th century, the population of the city had fallen to something like 30,000. A loss of more than 90%. The aqueducts that had carried Woolman's tons of water failed. The network that justified 1 million people simply wasn't there anymore, and the people followed the network out. Rome stayed a shrunken shadow of itself for centuries. You don't have to go to the ancient world. Detroit in 1950 was the 5th largest city in the United States, with a population of around 1,850,000, a roaring engine of the automobile age. By 2010, it had fallen to about 714,000, a loss of around 60% in 60 years. Not because Detroit grew old. Because the industrial substrate it was built on, the auto network, the particular web of factories and suppliers and jobs, hollowed out and moved on, and a city whose reactor loses its fuel cannot sustain the population the fuel once supported. And go deeper into time, and you find the same pattern, not senescence, but network collapse. The great classic Maya cities of Central America, places like Copan, which at its peak around the year 750 held perhaps 28,000 people, were progressively abandoned across the 8th and 9th centuries. And here I have to hedge, honestly, because the cause is genuinely multi-layered and still debated. There were severe droughts in that period that appear to have broken the agricultural networks those cities depended on, and there was also warfare and political strain and economic unraveling, all tangled together. Drought is associated with the collapse, not proven as its sole trigger. But the shape of the death is the familiar one. The cities didn't age out. The network that fed them broke, and the people dispersed. So here is the precise, honest truth about a city's mortality, and it's stranger and more specific than either immortal or mortal. A city cannot die of old age. There is no internal clock counting it down, no meter, no $1.5 billion beat budget it spends and exhausts. In that exact sense, it has broken the law of life, and it is deathless. But it can be killed, not by time, but by the collapse of the substrate that holds its network together. It dies the way a flame dies, not of old age, but only if you take away its fuel or its air. Almost never, but not never. And now you know what a city is. It's not an organism. It's not a machine either. A machine doesn't have a pulse, doesn't metabolize, doesn't heal an atomic wound in a generation. It's a third thing, a thing we made without ever deciding to, that took half its nature from the law of life and half from the law's mirror image. So let me ask the question we started with, the one under your two hands, one more time, because the answer changes everything about how the night ends. Is the city alive? I think, is the city alive is the wrong question. And I think seeing why it's the wrong question is the gift at the center of all of this. Here's the trouble. The most widely used scientific definition of life, the one that came out of NASA's exobiology working group, popularized by the biologist Gerald Joyce in the 1990s, the definition people actually reach for when they're hunting for life on other worlds is roughly this. Life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution, a thing that keeps itself going and that reproduces and evolves by natural selection. Hold a city up against that definition, and it gives a genuinely split answer.
Does a city sustain itself, metabolize, hold its order far from equilibrium by pumping energy through itself?
Yes, completely. It's a textbook dissipative structure, more alive on that count than you might be comfortable with. But does a city reproduce? Does it have offspring, pass on heritable traits, evolve by natural selection, the way a species does? No. Cities don't breed. London did not give birth to Manchester. They are founded, they grow, they network, but they do not reproduce and mutate and get selected the way living lineages do. So, by the working definition, a city is half alive and half not. And that's not a failure of the definition. It's the definition correctly telling you that you're holding a category it was never built to name. Alive or not alive is a question shaped for the world before we built cities, a world of organisms and rocks, things that either reproduce and evolve or sit there inertly. The city is neither. It's a new kind of thing, a structure that metabolizes like life and persists like a flame and computes like a reactor, but does not live or die by the rules of either. Asking whether it's alive is like asking whether a song is alive. It's the wrong axis. The honest answer isn't yes and isn't no. It's, that's not what this is. And honestly, even the law I've been so confident about has its own loose thread, and the channel's whole deal is that I show you the loose threads.
Some researchers have pulled hard on the scaling laws themselves.
A group led by Elsa Architute in 2015 showed something genuinely unsettling. Where you draw a city's boundary can change the answer. Redraw the edges of England's cities, and the famous upward bend, the superlinear, faster-than-life scaling, can soften. With one definition of city, a measure like inventiveness scales superlinearly, the city accelerating like the thing we've described. Redraw the boundary, set the cutoff somewhere else, and for that same measure, the acceleration can fade until it's hard to tell apart from ordinary, plodding, one-to-one growth. A separate reanalysis in 2016 by Leitao and colleagues found the nonlinearity isn't always as robust as first believed. So even the city's law-breaking is, at the edges, a live argument, which doesn't undo the core pattern, but does mean we hold it the way we hold the heartbeat budget. As a deep and real tendency, not a commandment. The thing about honest science is that the most interesting findings are the ones still arguing with themselves. But step back from the arguing, because under all of it, there is something settled enough to rest on, and it's where I want to leave you. Whatever the exact exponents, whatever the boundaries, two things are true at once, and holding them together is the whole point of everything we've done. The first is about the city. We built it, and it became a thing that does not get to stop. That's the deep meaning of everything we've walked through. The city runs on the mirror image of the law of life. It grows in order to accelerate, not in order to settle. It amplifies its output, good and terrible, the bigger it gets. And it does not die of old age, because it has no age. No meter, no budget that runs to zero. It feeds on connection and on pace, on the 15%, on your own quickening feet. The thing you live inside is a structure that, by its nature, can never come to rest, never finish, never exhale and be done. It has to keep reinventing itself, keep accelerating, keep the reactor hot forever, or its substrate collapses and it dies the hard way. There's even a strand of this math, and I'll flag it firmly as math, not prophecy, because what the equations say and what reality does are exactly the things still being argued. There's a strand that says a purely superlinear city would race toward a kind of impossible wall, a point where it would need infinite resources in finite time. Unless it keeps reinventing itself faster and faster and faster, each new wave of reinvention arriving sooner than the last. An accelerating treadmill with no off switch. Whether reality truly obeys that is genuinely unsettled. But the direction is the city's whole character. It cannot stop. It is not allowed to stop. And the second thing is about you. And it's the turn the whole night has been walking toward. You are made of the opposite stuff. You are an animal, ruled by Kleiber's gentle ancient law. You grew, and then you stopped growing. Your pulse is the slow kind, the big mammal kind. Your body bought in bulk and got the wholesale rate. And it is spending its budget at a stately, unhurried pace. And even so, it is spending it. Your meter is running. You will slow and settle and one day stop. Like the elephant, like the shrew, like every warm-blooded thing that ever drew breath. And you commute every day through the body of a thing that obeys the exact reverse. A quickening, deathless reactor that has its hand on the volume knob of your legs and is gently and constantly asking you to keep up, to move faster, to linger less, to match its pace. That's the vertigo, if you let it be vertigo. You are a slowing mortal cell inside a quickening deathless thing, and it feeds on the very pace it's pulling out of you. When I first followed this all the way down, that's exactly where it left me, and it sat heavy for a day or two. The thing we built will outlast us all, racing while each of us winds down and stops. It felt like the loneliest arrangement imaginable. And then it flipped, and it's been the other way ever since, and this is the gift I wanted to hand you before we're through. Go back to the very beginning. 2 fingers on your throat. That meter, counting down. When we started, it felt like a fuel gauge, like a countdown, like the thing you'd most want to escape, the budget that runs out, the beats you can't refill. The flaw, the thing that makes us small. But look what we found out about the only thing we know that doesn't have one. The city never gets to stop. That's not a privilege. That's a sentence. The deathless thing is the thing that can never put its work down, never finish, never reach the end of the day and be allowed to rest, never exhale and stay exhaled. It is condemned to keep accelerating, to keep reinventing itself ahead of the wall, forever, because the moment it stops, it doesn't get to rest either. It just dies the hard way, by collapse. Immortality, for the city, isn't freedom from the meter. It's the loss of the one mercy the meter contains. The mercy of being finished. Because that's what your budget actually is. Not a sentence. A permission. Your 1.5 billion beats, your doubled human portion of 2.5 or 3 billion, are not just a countdown toward nothing. They are the thing that means your striving has an edge to it, a last page, a point at which you are allowed to set it all down. You don't have to keep up with the city. You were never built to. You're built like the elephant, on the slow and ancient plan, to spend your fixed and finite portion at an unhurried pace, and then to be done. And being done is not the tragedy. Being done is the gift the deathless thing would trade anything for and can never have. The city has to run forever. You get to stop. A clock that runs out is the one thing a clock that never stops can only envy. So, the next time you're moving through your city, walking a little faster than you mean to, because the place has its hand on your legs, you might feel the 2 pulses again. The big one all around you, in the pipes and the trains and the wires, racing, deathless, never allowed to rest. And the small one under your fingers, if you go looking for it. Slow, finite, yours. And the small one is not the lesser of the 2. The small one is the one that gets to finish. You are not falling behind the magnificent thing you built. You are simply running on the older, kinder law, the one that says everything that grows gets to stop, that every meter that counts also mercifully runs out, and that the right number of heartbeats is not infinity. It's enough. You don't have to keep up. You were made very precisely to be the thing that gets to rest. The city under your hand will be racing long after you've set your portion down, and that was never the thing to envy. The streetlight stays on. A footstep somewhere slows, and under your fingers, unhurried, in no rush at all, the small, sufficient, finite knock goes on spending its enormous, ordinary fortune, one beat at a time.